In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you about value and shading. So value in art means how light or dark a color or tone is. So colors have value too, but the easiest way to think about it is in black and white. So that's how we're going to start, is with graphite, doing a value scale, and sphere showing the light source. Light source is the most important thing in how you determine what values to put where. So the way we see anything with our eyes is light bouncing off of objects. So we see light and we see shadows. And if you're ever going to draw something realistically, then you need to know how to do that. It's not always the goal to draw realistically, but I want you to know how to do it if you do want to. So to make something look three-dimensional, like it has real form, you need highlights, midtones, and shadows. And the highlights and shadows are determined by where the light source is coming from. But first, these images show you how light source determines value. And the angle of the surface catching light will determine its value relative to the rest of the object. You can see how the different planes, especially in the face on the right, catch different percentages of the full possible light. So the more it's turned away from the light source, the less percentage of light that it's catching and the more shadowed it is. This is a really good exercise to practice thinking about light source. So you're going to imagine that the light source for all of these different little items on the page is at the top center. So you're going to imagine what it would look like, where the shadows would be on each item or object if that thing was three-dimensional, and where the highlights would be. So I want you to shade in each little design as if the light source was coming from the top. So I've given you an example on the right of what it might look like finished, but try not to just copy mine. That's meant to be helpful, but not to just copy. This is a still life, like what you might do as a drawing or painting, and it shows the light source and shadows really well. You can see that the light source is obviously coming from the top right because that's where all the highlights are and all the shadows go off to the left. So that consistency in the direction of the shadows is really important in making a drawing look believable and visually pleasing. After you've done your value scale, value gradient, and sphere, which I'm about to show you in more detail, like this, your next project, still on value, is going to be a paper sculpture. So you get to choose between two possibilities of how to do it. You can set up, either way, you're going to be setting up a three-dimensional sculpture out of paper. And the first option is just to do 2 or 3 strips and then curl them, like this example shows, and tape them down in place because you'll probably need to do this in more than one sitting, so you don't want it to move. Your second option is to form your paper sculpture into words taped down on the paper, like these examples. In this one, you can see the actual sculpture and then the drawing. This isn't necessarily the best drawing, but it is a good example of showing what you're going to do. So I would recommend writing out with a pencil where your letters are going to be, and then it's a template that you can just tape down your strips of paper on top of. Also remember to include the cast shadow because that helps it look grounded and real, and most of the time things do have a cast shadow unless they're floating in the air. Also keep in mind this value scale and gradient as you draw because I want you to show the full range of value in your highlights and shadows. As the artist, you get artistic license to emphasize the contrast. So you know how on an Instagram filter or another filter on your phone, you might increase the contrast on your phone to make it look better. So it's the same in art, where the stronger contrast is going to be more eye-catching. So make sure you get those nice clean whites, a variety of midtones, and dark darks. One beginner mistake is being kind of timid and not wanting to push hard with your pencils. So don't be afraid to push hard and get dark tones. Don't worry if yours doesn't look as good as these. I took pictures of the best examples from the class that I was teaching at the time. I know that you're all at different levels in your experience and skill already, so just do your best and try and push yourself to improve. The rubric is on the last page where you can see exactly what you need to do to be successful. So here's my cat, Rye. I just thought she should join us for a second before we transition to how to shade. Do you want to learn how to shade, Rye? You wouldn't be very good at it. You don't have thumbs. Goodbye. Okay, we're going to get started on shading with graphite. So first I want to introduce you to the materials that you will need. You don't need all of these pencils, but I'm still going to explain the different drawing pencils that exist. There is a range of drawing pencils. Drawing pencils exist on a scale, kind of like a number scale where you have 0 in the middle and the numbers continue in both directions. So 0 would be right in the middle, like an HB, right here in the middle. I'll put that down here. As we go up, more commonly you'll see even numbers, even though odd numbers exist as well. The highest I have ever seen is a 9. So I'll go ahead and add that because I do have a 9B pencil here. So if you're just gonna have one pencil to draw with, I would recommend having a 6B. That is just my personal favorite. It just depends on your preference. So the farther you go to the right, towards the B end, it will be softer lead, softer and darker. So on the flip side, the H pencils get harder and lighter. So that means 9B is the darkest pencil you can have and 8H is the lightest. But like I said, even if all you have is one pencil, you can still get a wide range of values just from that one pencil, whatever it is. I don't prefer the H pencils as much, so I don't even have as many of them, but what I have right here is a 4H. You have to be careful with the H pencils because the lead is harder, and with smooth shading, your goal is that it be smooth and even and you don't see individual lines or strokes. So if you do have different pencils, you should experiment with each of them, see what value range you can get. Here's an H pencil, and this is a good example of something you can do to sharpen it in a different way. So you can see that the lead is sticking out farther here. The benefit of this is that you have a bigger surface area if you wanted to turn it on its side, but it also won't get dull as fast. You have longer to work with it. So you can use an X-Acto knife very carefully, never put your fingers in front of the blade, but you could shave it with an X-Acto knife to get that wood farther away from there. And then you can also use sandpaper. You can use sandpaper. I'm rolling it as I rub this on the sandpaper to sharpen that point more. Notice how I'm drawing with my arm, not with my wrist. These wiggly wrist movements are going to be a problem in the long run. So practice right now moving your elbow or shoulder and not wrist. Also, just for kicks, I thought I would show you this ebony pencil, which I just broke the lead, so I'm not going to draw with it. But I have tested these ebony pencils. These are a pretty good general drawing pencil, and what I have discovered is that an ebony pencil is just about the same as a 3B. So that's a good one to have if you're just going to have one pencil. Okay, my other materials are erasers. The first one is a kneaded eraser. You can see it's flexible. This is good for looser material like a soft pencil or charcoal. It's really good for lightening a tone, not necessarily completely erasing it. It cleans itself as you pull it like this, which is nice. So it's not going to totally erase lines, but it does a pretty good job. It's also nice because you can squeeze it into the shape that you want. So you can squeeze it into a point or into a line. But I always like to have a harder eraser around too. Just make sure that it's not too gushy, not too spongy feeling, because that's not going to do as good of a job. Next, this is a blending stump or a tortilla. I don't know how you say it. I'm going to spell it because I do know how to spell it. Tortillan. I don't know. Just don't use it. Really, don't use it for a long time. If you are new at all to drawing, or even if you've been drawing for a long time but you do use these, I don't want you to use it at all for the first several projects because it can be a crutch. It can make your drawings look really smudgy, and it can be kind of like a cheating way of blending when you should be able to make your pencil lead look nice and soft and blended without this. It actually takes graphite off of the page sometimes, so you might end up lightening a tone when you don't mean to. It has a time and a place to use it after you have learned how not to use it. For the value scale, you can see here my finished value scale. So you're gonna make it look just like that. Your goals with this are that it be smooth, no lines, that it be a full value range, and that each box be even steps. So you shouldn't see a big jump from 2 to 3 and then barely any difference between 3 and 4. It needs to be an even change from step to step all the way to black or to your darkest tone. Number 1, white, is just the paper. It's just white, don't touch it. You can do nice straight lines. If you have a thin ruler, usually they are actually 1 inch, so you could just trace all the way around. But I really like these clear rulers because I can line up my line and know that they're perfectly parallel. To do a grid like this, you really need to make marks on both sides to make sure that your lines are going to be straight and parallel. And then you line up your ruler to both marks. And then you make a second rectangle the same length but with no lines in it because that's where your gradient is going to go. And gradient means gradual. So it's going to be a soft fade from light to dark instead of stair-step increments. Okay, so this brings me to the actual teaching of technique. So first of all, I should have said this in the blending stump discussion. Don't use your finger to blend with. It's too big, it's imprecise, and it has oils on it that will mess with the surface of your paper and make it harder to erase and redraw. And it's gonna look smudgy. It's never gonna look good, so don't do it. If you've drawn much, you might notice that you get graphite on the back of your hand here. I like to have a piece of paper that I put my hand on top of as I go so that I'm not smudging with my skin. I like to use a combination of straight parallel lines and circular or oval strokes. So my strokes, if I enlarged it, would be ovals that kind of overlap and slowly work my way around. That's much bigger than I do it. So when I do it small and lightly, you don't see the lines. I'm using the 6B pencil and I'm very lightly moving around, overlapping what I've already done so that I get a nice even tone. And if I do end up seeing strokes, you can turn your paper perpendicular and go the opposite direction to kind of even out those gaps. So leave this one white. I'm going to use my circular overlapping motions. Now, when I have a line that I want to get right up against and not leave a gap, I'm going to turn my paper and make my strokes along the line. So it needs to be along the same direction as the line to get it nice and clean up to the edge. Sometimes if your pencil is too sharp, you can rub it around on a scrap paper to dull it down a little bit. Patience is a big key with this. You have to go slow in order to even out the tone. You'll notice with a softer pencil that you get more little white specks of paper showing through. And that's okay, that's fine. But if it bothers you, one little trick is to use a harder pencil lead to blend in those little specks, to blend over the softer pencil that you just used. And the harder lead gets down into the grooves of the paper better. You probably can't expect to just perfectly go in order and make them even steps between each tone. You may have to jump back and forth and realize, oh, I have to go back and darken this one or lighten something, etc. You can use your eraser to clean up edges. For the gradient, even though there's not blocks, you're still going to leave the end of it white. So you won't start your very light shading until half an inch or an inch in. There's not a right or wrong way to start it. You just have to move around the whole time to make sure that it's an even transition the whole way.